So in the second half of this video, I'd like to concentrate on putting together the little shelf that was above the counters, so that open shelf area. I also want to make the fridge, and then there was a little cabinet that sat above the fridge that I'd like to do as well. I'm also going to try and get the curtains done as well. So starting with that open shelf unit, so the main shelf went all the way across, right from the window to over top of the stove. And on the right hand side of that shelf, there was another 4 shelves that went up from that main shelf. And that's where dishes, cups, food items, that sort of thing was kept. So this piece that I have here, this is the main shelf or the lowest shelf. And you can see where I've drawn out here some measurements because I want to make sure that I'm keeping my shelves level as well as keeping them straight. So I'm going to start by putting the 4 shelf unit onto this longer piece. And here I've also drawn out here where the shelves are as well. So I'll start by putting the left side of that piece of shelving in, and then I'll just start slowly adding the horizontal shelves all the way across, and then we'll add the final piece on the right hand side as well. So here's our first shelf in. Now you can see I'm not going all the way across to the right because that shelving unit was divided into 2 sections. And so I'm going to do the first set of shelves first. I'll add that center piece, and then I'll add the shelves on the right hand side as well. So there's 3 of the shelves in. I'm going to leave the very top till the end. So now I'm going to add the dividing piece that went between the 2 sections of shelving. So here's our first section. So now I can add the next set of shelving for the right side of the shelving unit. I'm also trying to clean up any glue residue as well. Just makes painting later that much easier. So now that those shelves are all together, I can go ahead and add the top shelf on. Now the top shelf is going to be flush at the back, but it does overhang on either side as well as the front by about 1 millimeter. So you can see here where the overhang is on either side, and then again just a tiny bit on the front as well. All right, we'll put that aside for now, and now I'm going to build the little cupboard that sits above the fridge. So this is very simple. They're not going to have opening doors, just door fronts. So I'm going to start by just making an open-ended box. So I'm just adding the sides on one at a time, and I'm using my 1, 2, 3 blocks, or setup blocks as they're sometimes called, to make sure that everything stays nice and square. So now that the box is together, I had to create 2 cupboard doors. So I created the doors out of the thinnest wood I had, which is just a wood veneer. But the trim around the doors, I just used some heavy white cardstock, and it seemed to fit quite well scale-wise without sticking out too far. So here are the two cupboard doors. I'm just going to glue them onto the front, and then we'll add some handles as well. I will eventually add some handles, but I'm going to wait and paint it first. Moving on to the refrigerator. Now, the refrigerator in the friend's apartment was quite retro. It was very old, and it had these rounded corners on the top. So I've opted to use foam board rather than wood. I cut the shape first on a piece of graph paper, and then I used that to cut 5 pieces for the refrigerator. I'm going to glue all 5 pieces together, but I want to make sure that I weight down each layer as I go to prevent any warping. I'm making sure that I also spread the glue out really well and make sure that the glue gets all the way out to all of the edges. Now once I have all 5 layers together and the glue has had a chance to dry, I'm going to go in and even out all of the edges using some fine grain sandpaper. Next I cut 2 strips of very lightweight cardstock. I cut 2 widths, one the width of 4 pieces of the foam board and a second strip the width of just 1 piece, and I glued those on. This separates the body of the fridge from the door of the fridge. I left a very small gap in between the 2 strips, and now I'm just taking my ball stylus and I'm just accenting that space in between so that it looks like there's more definition between the door and the body. I sanded off any sharp edges, and now I want to add some detail to the front of the refrigerator. I cut a strip of the same silver vinyl that I used on the stove, and I'm just going to glue it on the front of the refrigerator. I'll fashion a door handle for the fridge out of this very thin piece of wood. I decided to paint the stick first before I cut it to size, just to make it a little bit easier to hang on to. Then I glued that piece onto the front of the fridge. Now it's time to paint these pieces so that we can install them. So this little cupboard that was above the fridge was this very light beigey color. And then of course this shelving unit was the turquoise blue that was so infamous with the apartment. I love the look of them now that they're all painted, but before I install this little cupboard, I have to add those handles. I ended up making the fridge out of some scrap pieces of polystyrene. I simply made an open-ended box, put it down into the hole that I had cut, and then used some heavy cardstock to make a frame around the outside. Next I tackled the window treatments in the kitchen window. Now the original curtains in the apartment were more of a beigey yellow color, and they had more of a kitchen look to them. There was things like rolling pins and other kitchen items. I couldn't find that material, unfortunately, but I did have this material, which I think I can make work. So my first task is to make it the right color. I wanted to test to see if I could get to the right color, so I made myself a strong cup of tea and cut a swatch from the material. Now I'm going to leave this piece of material in the tea overnight, and I'll see what kind of a tea stain effect I get. The tea staining method worked great, so I just wanted to show you what the original one looked like versus what the tea stained fabric looked like. I of course needed to iron out all of the wrinkles from the pieces of fabric. I'm going to tell you something about this little iron that I'm using. I bought this about a year ago, but I've never used it until now. And I want to tell you that the heat that this little iron has is no joke. This mat that I'm using is a mat that I've used to press material on for years. And all it took was about 30 seconds of this little mini iron resting on it to scorch the mat that's designed for ironing. So please, if you're using this little type of iron, be careful, because boy, that burn would be awful. Now this little piece that I'm pressing right now is the little piece that goes underneath the sink, but it was the same fabric as the curtains above. I created a little hem on both sides just to make sure that it had a finished look to it. The next two pieces are the side pieces for the upper window. So again, I made a hem on both sides, and then I just took the iron and creased it back and forth like an accordion. Here's one side, and you can see my little collection of scorch marks on my mat in the upper right hand corner. So there's my two side pieces almost completed. The last piece is the piece of fabric that kind of swooped up over the top. Now this one took me a minute to figure out exactly how I was going to do it. I tried a few different things, from using pieces of thread to pull it up and gather on each side. But at the end, what I found worked best was to just gather up small pieces at a time and using dressmaker pins or stick pins to stick it together to start. Now, if you've ever tried to work with fabric in miniature, you probably already know that it doesn't behave the same way as it does in a real size. So I just did my best to drape it as naturally as I could. It's certainly not perfect, but it was as good as I could get it. Then I just went in and just did a very quick press. Once I had it the right shape, I tacked it down to a piece of parchment paper. Now you can see the lovely scorch mark there on the upper right side of the fabric. I did that with the final press. So I've put that iron away. I'm not sure if I'll use it again, but we'll see. All right, so next I went in with some watered down Mod Podge, and I just painted basically the whole piece. And I'm going to let that dry and stiffen up, and then I'm going to be able to actually cut away that scorched part on the right hand side, because luckily it's in a spot that I'm not going to be using. While that top piece is drying, I've brought back in the two side pieces, and you can see that I've cut off the bottom at an angle. The original curtains in the apartment had that design, and I wanted to reflect that. There was also an accordion blind that sat behind the curtains on that window, and I've just created that out of some ivory colored cardstock. I started by installing the blind first because of course that sits at the back, followed by the top draped piece, and then of course the two sides. And lastly, before I go, because I just couldn't stand the empty shelves, I pulled out some of my stash of miniatures to try and find some items that I thought might work in 1/24 scale. Now I normally work in 1/12 scale, so I didn't have a lot, but I was able to find a few pieces, and then I was able to make a few pieces as well. So I have these little white dishes, which might work as some serving trays, and I'm going to put those way up on the top shelf of the blue cabinets. I also found these little tiny little water glasses. I have actually a silicone mold, and I made these out of resin a long time ago and thought I would never use them, but kept them anyway, and lo and behold, now I have a place for them. I also have this little teapot that I had made out of resin, which is going to work in this scale. And then I used a technique that I found from Queen City Minis to make some little tiny coffee cups. The little plates here are just made out of cardstock. I just put them inside a small circle stencil, and then just use my ball stylus to go around and shape out the bottom. These little cans of food were just made on some very small round wood dowel, and I have a bunch of like free printable minis that I found on Google Images, and I just reduced the size down from what I would normally use and just kind of wrap them around little scraps of cardboard, tiny pieces of wood, just to make these few little food items as well. And then of course we need some little books as well. I know she had some recipe books sitting on various shelves, and so we've got those as well. This little guy came from, I don't even know where. I think it was part of a Temu order. It's supposed to be 4 milk jugs. I think I'm just going to take the jugs out, maybe paint them and make them into maybe little spice jars or something along those lines. So here's what it looks like when I have it all together. I still have room for a few more things, which I'll add as I go along, but for now, at least the shelves are not bare. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the Friends series, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.